Good day and welcome to episode 1804, 1804. I almost said 24. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I hope it is very romantical for you. However, I must say that the powers that be, and you've heard me talk about this if you've been following my work, do not want Valentine's Day to be romantical for us. They want to see people single because that is a better deal in terms of tax revenue. It's a better deal for the economy, and it is sad for society. See, we always have these issues where culture and happiness and lifestyle are in conflict, right? Well, culture's not in conflict, but the cultural Marxism is in conflict with our happiness. And so there's a lot to this issue. I'll unpack just a little bit of it today. But first, the more pressing issue, think about this. Next time we're together on Wednesday, 2 days from now, we may be on the verge of World War III, quite literally. And I've only talked about this a little bit, but I have been following it intensely. The situation with Russia, Ukraine, and then I think if that blows up, pardon the pun, if that becomes a disaster, which it may well be in 2 days or very soon, then I worry that China will take the opportunity to do what they want to do with Taiwan. And of course, Russia and China will ally. And just think about the way this thing plays out. This could be more serious than the Cuban Missile Crisis, where if you follow the doomsday clock, which I don't know, it's kind of hokey, right? But it is a proxy for some of this stuff. If you follow that, that's when we were, I think, closest to doomsday during the Cuban Missile Crisis in recent history since World War II. But this situation going on now is incredibly serious. And I just don't think the media is reporting on it on any way that reflects the severity of this situation. Think about it. Why would we want to be at war with Russia? The Russian people are okay. I like Russia. I think it's great. They've got their agenda. They want to do what they want to do. They've got a leader who's a bit of a tyrant, obviously, but it's not cause for a war. And if you look at the powers that be, the narrative they're creating is all the warpath, the warpath, the warpath, because they profit from it. Because governments and, well, not governments directly, but the way the whole system is controlled with the central bankers and the military industrial complex, they stand to make insane profits by destroying people, destroying lives, and destroying things. All of this stuff has to be rebuilt, right, after the war ends. And maybe this one will be different. Just let's remember Einstein's quote about how I don't know how they'll fight World War III, but I know how they'll fight World War IV with sticks and stones. Because Russia is more powerful than any enemy or any country we have been at war with. They are literally 50 times more powerful than all of those countries that we have been at war with since World War II. So this is an incredibly serious situation. What are there, about 7,000 missiles aimed at each other now between Russia and the US, each of them carrying multiple warheads, where each warhead is up to 100 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II to end World War II, which, by the way, I think was a good decision. I sometimes you have to do this stuff, but nowadays it has simply become a money grab and a power grab and a complete scam. And think of the refugee crisis this will create. Another excuse to have Europe be overrun, to just create a massive refugee crisis that doesn't need to happen. So it's pretty scary. And I don't think the media is really doing it justice at all. So governments and the elite class wanting people to be separate and single. Why is that better for them? Well, it's better because think about it. Before the second wave of feminism. I almost called it communism because it's not too far off, really. And before second wave feminism, when women were at home, they weren't producing tax revenue for governments that have become progressively more and more broke with their disgusting spending habits. And they weren't producing enough consumer demand. So if you're the government, if you're the corporatocracy, you benefit by people divorcing, by people never marrying, because you need two of everything, right? If you share a household, you only need one of everything. You only need one bed for that couple to sleep in. You only need one coffee maker, one sofa. Whereas if everybody's single, you got to have two beds, two coffee makers, two sofas, and two of everything else. So it is to the benefit of the corporatocracy to literally double their market share, double the market share. Why do you think they support all these absurd woke ideologies? Because they want people to be single. They want them to be apart. If you look at the movie narrative, I mean, I remember that old movie, maybe you saw it, Kramer versus Kramer, right? And all of these movies that started to change during the 60s, the 70s, right? And the whole narrative became split up, be separate, have insanely high expectations that can never be met of a mate, right? You know, this friend of mine, a female friend, she was over here, and she's attractive, and she was over here recently, sitting on my sofa, talking to me about her different romances and her different boyfriends, and all of these different, from past and present, her different dating opportunities, and she was complaining about every one of them. And as I'm listening to her complain, one guy is a slacker. He doesn't earn enough money. He's got to get a better job. He's just too lazy. The next guy, but that guy is, great in bed. Okay. I'm just going to tell you what she said. He's great in bed. So, and more fun, right? She had a lot of fun with him, and fun in both ways. Right. and then the next guy, he's a really good guy, great personality, but he drinks too much. And then the next guy, he was a super successful guy, really successful, earned a lot of money, very responsible, but wasn't as good in the bedroom, right? And wasn't as fun. And, and I'm just listening to all this. And then there were a whole bunch more, and she just had a problem with every one of them. And first of all, I'm thinking of the marketplace. Remember the Craigslist gold digger? Look it up. There's a blog post on my website about it. I'm thinking of the marketplace for dating and mating, right? And that marketplace is just like economics. It's about supply and demand. And women are the choosers and men are the pursuers. That's the way it's been since the beginning of time. But if the media, if the cultural narrative sets these absurd expectations, and they do it for both sides, not just women, but I think it's more acute with women. Men are pretty simple creatures, right? They're more visual, right? Women are more complex in terms of their choosing. And so there's a lot more seeds of doubt to plant with women than there are with men. Because of the complexity and simplicity of what either side is looking for, right? Women look for power and success and resources. Men look for beauty. And that's been the trade throughout history. Now, you could say this is ridiculous. It's not that way anymore. Well, guess what? We're all still basically animals. And we all respond to these stimuli. I can't even talk today. More coffee, please. Stimuli, and we respond in a certain way. Okay, look, at the end of the day, we all default to our evolutionary perspective, right? We all default to the evolutionary perspective. So, they can try and change the narrative with all the stuff they plant in the movies, in television, in advertising. I mean, this is not just in movies and television and literature, right? It's always been that way. Magazines, right? If you read a women's magazine, you'll see how just absurd. I mean, think about it. Years ago, the a good guy, right, for a woman, right? And of course, there are same-sex relationships and marriages. I get it, but I'm just talking about the oldest idea of men and women, right? Um, Years ago, the thing was, if it's dating, the thing was, does he have a car? I mean, literally, think of the words to the song, Tell Me More, from the movie Grease. By the way, they filmed that at my high school, Venice High. Yes, that movie was filmed there. And so, they're on the football bleachers and they're singing, Tell Me More, Tell Me More. There's Olivia Newton-John, John Travolta. And it tells you about what each side was looking for in the other, right? And so the girls say, tell me more. Like, does he have a car? A car. That was like the winning prize to get the girl, right? And then when it came to marriage, it was, does he have a job? Is he going to be able to be responsible and support a family, right? And now it's just absurd. And by the way, I will tell you, this friend of mine, who will remain nameless, and she's probably going to get very upset with me if she hears this podcast, who was going on, droning on and on about all her romances, past and present, right? And, she's over 30. And so the supply and demand dynamic changes, right? Now, granted, it has lasted longer than ever in history lately because, look, people used to die when they're in their 30s, a long time ago, or 40s. But it's just unbelievable how the media, the narrative, is just sowing these seeds of separateness and doubt, and they just want singles. And think about it. Singles are not as strong a unit, right? Because when you're alone, you could doubt yourself. You don't have other people to rely on, right? You don't have that family unit. So you're less likely to rise up against the powers that be. And you're much more likely to be dependent on the powers that be. So when Aid to Families with Dependent Children program came out, it literally created millions of fatherless families. I remember being in line at the grocery store in, of all places, Corona del Mar, California, a area right near Newport Beach, California, where I used to live. And well, I actually lived in Corona del Mar too at one time. And I remember there were two women in line in front of me, and one was saying that her oldest kid is turning 18, so she's got to get pregnant again so she doesn't lose the government aid. And this was in Corona del Mar, California. I mean, I just could not believe my ears. It's just unbelievable, this narrative. But the companies want to double the size of their market share. So if they split people up, they double the size of the market share. The governments would prefer singles to couples because singles are more dependent on government and less likely to have the strong belief system and the family unit that gives them the power to rise up against government. This is true, folks. Argue with me if you want. Comment below. I'm happy to listen to opposing points of view, but this is the way it is. Now, if you buy that, which you should because it's reality, then take a look at one great example that happened yesterday of this narrative: the Super Bowl. The pathetic, base, just awful halftime show at Super Bowl. Think about how the halftime show has changed and how music has changed over the past few years, few decades. The music used to be about getting people together, about finding the one, about appreciating relationships, about appreciating each other. Now the music is a fucking disaster. It's disgusting. I mean, granted, there's some good music today, but most of it is vile, base, disgusting music. And the Super Bowl halftime show was exactly that. It's just unbelievable how people are falling for this narrative and how it is just dramatically changed. It is a coordinated attempt to keep people separate. Let's look at this. Let's look at the economic side of it. Okay, here we go. So here, you may have seen this, of course, and we've talked about it before. This is the debt clock, the US debt clock. Go to usdebtclock.org. And now it's over $30 trillion. And this is, there's a couple important numbers I want to show you on here because it's busy and it's confusing. But let's just talk about a couple of them. And then let's project these numbers out into the future. So $30 trillion in national debt. That's a $90,000 per citizen, okay? And that's debt per taxpayer of $239,000 per taxpayer. Remember, citizens are different than taxpayers. There's more citizens than there are taxpayers, unfortunately. Well, some of them are too young to pay taxes. That's okay. But some are here illegally and should be paying taxes and don't. Okay, so debt per taxpayer, right? But look at this next one. This is the US federal tax revenue. Okay, you've got the debt of over 30 trillion and the tax revenue of just about 4 trillion. $12,000 per citizen in revenue versus debt per citizen of $90,000 and debt per taxpayer of $239,000. Okay, fine. So the tax revenue is 4 trillion a year, but the US federal spending right here is almost $7 trillion a year. How do you ever make this equation work? It's mathematically impossible. It will never work. It cannot work. Okay, so what do? Well, they will inflate their way out of the debt. Oh, one more number before we go to the future. That's what I want to do next. I want to go to the future. But the GDP, the gross domestic product, in other words, all the value the country produces every year is $24 trillion. Now, this number is highly manipulated because they count all sorts of government spending in there. So it's like a double counting where the government can spend money and increase the GDP, but what they're really doing is putting us further into the hole. It's just insane, right? It's insane. Now, one more number here that is super, super important. And this is where we get to the big choice. The Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world for their corresponding countries and the governments around the world need to make and the trade they need to make. Here it is. This is a big deal, folks. Are you ready? Total interest paid. This is over $3 trillion. Okay, that's interest per adult of $12,971. So that's quite something. So we have inflation right now. Inflation has become a big problem, just as I predicted it would be. Here we are. We have arrived. We have arrived at inflation. And it is impoverishing people at a record pace. So what is the government going to do? What is the Federal Reserve going to do? What are other central banks going to do? Well, I've long said, they will simply inflate their way out of the problem. But the problem is that is going to impoverish the citizens, most of them, the ones that aren't following my plan, buying income property and securing it with long-term fixed rate debt, where they get that debt at negative interest rates, inflation-induced debt destruction. If you're not familiar with that strategy, look it up. I'm one of the early pioneers. I've been talking about this longer than anybody out there that you've probably been following, over 18 years. And that's a trademark, by the way, inflation-induced debt destruction. So that is going to be their business plan. So the question we got to ask is, this future, is it inflationary or is it going to be deflationary? I mean, some say deflationary. what is the likelihood? What would you bet on, right? How do you know what's going to happen in the future? How do you know that we're going to have inflation? Maybe our modern day Paul Volcker, former Federal Reserve Chair, will come along and raise interest rates and cool off the economy, and inflation will become tame again, maybe around that 2% target the Federal Reserve used to say they they were in favor of. But the problem is that would make the carrying cost on this $30 trillion, and I haven't even mentioned unfunded mandates, unfunded entitlements, unfunded promises the government has made into the future. We've talked about that many times before. And my prior episodes with Professor Lawrence Kutlikoff on the show talking about that are pretty intriguing as well. Last check, that was well over $220 trillion. Think about that. GDP of 24 trillion, let's call 4 trillion of that fake. It's probably more, but just for round numbers sake, the old number 220 trillion in unfunded promises. If the government taxed everybody at 100% and stopped spending today, it would take 11 years to fund the current unfunded promises the government has made into the future. The math is totally impossible. It will never, ever work. It cannot work. So the choice is, do you raise interest rates and cool inflation and make the carrying cost on this government debt extremely expensive and essentially bankrupt the government? Or do you simply keep rates low? Now, granted, they're going up, so they're trying to cool it a little bit by raising rates, but rates are nowhere near where they need to be to truly cool off the inflation problem. Do you do that and calm inflation so that the citizens, the people, cannot lose their standard of living and cannot be robbed by the hidden tax of inflation? Inflation is a robber and a thief. It's a liar. It's a pickpocket. It's stealing the value of our savings, our stocks, our bonds. And it is also, thankfully, diminishing the value of our debt. So check out my work on inflation-induced debt destruction if you're not familiar with it. If you are, it never hurts to review it. Go to jasonhartman.com, type inflation-induced debt destruction in the search bar, and you can find all my old episodes about it. You can also find them on the YouTube channel, Well Supplies Last, because Big Brother is watching you. And they are taking down lots of content that they don't like, that doesn't fit the narrative. Okay, now let me just minimize this, and let me show you this. I know it's kind of small, and I can't make it a larger screen. Oh, well, maybe I can actually. Oh, yes, I can. Okay, take a look at this. This is the app, the phone app that you can download of the US Debt Clock, which I would recommend you do. It's only $1.99. And this is what they project will happen in 4 years. So how do you know inflation's going to happen? Well, remember that current debt is just over $30 trillion. In just 4 years, at the current situation, which is likely to be even worse, especially if we go into a big, stupid new war, right? With the current situation, well, no, that's not as good. Let's go this way. Okay. With the current situation, sorry, plan producer here, folks. Okay, this is, now you can see it better. With the current situation, the current expenditures, this debt would be almost $53 trillion. That's almost double what it is today. So they are trapped. The powers that be, the elites running the world, are trapped. They simply can't raise rates enough to cool off inflation. And they spend like drunken sailors, so they can't stop spending because they want to stay in power. They want to keep all the promises, all the goodies, just like Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was well liked by a lot of people. We consider him to be a the late Hugo Chavez, to be a dictator and an idiot and a tyrant. That's an accurate description. But when people are dependent on government for survival, hey, they'll do anything. They'll do what they have to do to eat and to have shelter and to have the basics. And that's why Hugo Chavez, just like Obama and Biden and, to a lesser degree, the Republican side, but they do it too. They're well liked when they're doling out the goodies. It's like Santa Claus, right? Year-round Santa Claus, the government just doling out the goodies. So they are trapped. And the choice is, do they impoverish the government or impoverish the people? What do you think they're going to choose? I think the answer is pretty self-evident. And that is not good for us. So instead of leaving you with, we're all basically doomed because we've got our guest today. By the way, the uneducated economist, Simon Caron, is our guest today. And we're going to have him in two parts. He'll be back Wednesday as well because it's a fairly long interview. But what do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to choose you? Do you think they're going to choose us? Do you think they're going to choose we the people? Or are they going to choose themselves? Well, if history is any guide, they're going to choose themselves. They're going to save their own skin. And they're not going to impoverish the government. They're going to impoverish the people. But what can you do about it? You can simply align your interests with theirs. Align your interests with the two most powerful forces the human race has ever known, governments and central banks. And you do that by buying income property with 3-decade-long cheap fixed rate debt at negative interest rates below the cost of not only real inflation, as it has been many times, but stated inflation. And that's only happened a few times. So this is a very unique opportunity. A lot of you out there are thinking, well, Jason, the real estate market is due for a correction. It's going to crash. Prices have been rising fast. Well, make sure you check out my work on the Hartman Comparison Index so you really know how to do the math and you know how to count and you know how to evaluate prices. But even if that is true, if prices are too high, which I say they're not because I use multiple measuring sticks, that's why I created the Hartman Comparison Index. So you weren't just comparing to one thing, the dollar, which obviously is a moving target. You were comparing to lots of things. So you get a more accurate way to value real estate. Okay, great. Check out the Hartman Comparison Index for that. You can get a free white paper at hartmanindex.com. Totally free. You get it right away. 17 pages long, explains a whole bunch of this stuff. But where was I really going with that? Oh, yeah. If you're waiting to try and time the real estate market, in any financial market, the market timers have never succeeded in any consistent way. Never. Just whether it be precious metals or cryptocurrency or real estate or stocks or bonds, the market timers just never seem to do very well. That's just true in like every market. Commodities, currencies, whatever, right? The people that win the game are the people that make sensible, value-based investments and hold them for a long enough time for them to pay off, because it is just really, really hard to predict the timing of any market. We all know that, okay? That's a fool's errand. That's a speculator. That's a gambler. Doesn't work. But I ask you this question. Even if you're right, the real estate market is on the verge of a crash and it's going to collapse. And it will certainly correct at some point. I'll be the first to say that. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime very soon. Now, granted, World War III breaks out. All bets are off. Who knows what will happen. But probably a lot of inflation will happen, and that'll be great for income property investors. And it'll be great for general real estate investors too, but really good for those following my income property plan. But the question you have to ask yourself, and this will be my parting thought before we get to the uneducated economist, our guest today. The question you have to ask yourself is, would you rather have the money cheap or would you rather have the property cheap? Remember, 1% in interest rate is equal to approximately 10% in purchase price. You want the money cheap or the property cheap? You're very unlikely to get both at the same time. History has taught us that. Okay, we're going to have a small portion of Simon Caron, our uneducated economist, and then we're going to have him back on the next episode because it's a long interview. So let's go get to that right now.